All right, welcome to chapter 13 of the book of Romans. There's a lot for us to learn in here, a lot of guidance from Paul about how should we live our life. What are some of the governing principles and things we should be thinking about to help us in our life? So this is going to be to help provide that balance to what we talked about earlier about grace just a couple chapters ago, that it's not just believing in Christ that gets us there, but there are things we need to be doing. And Paul's going to get into more of that in this chapter. So, verse 1, let every soul be subject unto the higher powers, for there is no power but of God. The powers that be are ordained of God. So, let's think about this for a second here, okay? God has a power. We often refer it to priesthood as the authority to act in the name of God, okay? God retains the power. All he gives us is authority to access his power. We don't get the power itself. We get authority to access his power. And what he's saying here is that authority has been given to the leaders of the church. Those are the powers that be are ordained of God, basically is what it is. So this is an important thing for us to look at. In fact, the New Testament Study Manual says these verses also contain some of the clearest New Testament descriptions of a disciple's civic responsibility. There were good reasons for Paul to counsel Christians to be subject to civil authorities. Roman rulers placed a high priority on maintaining peace and quelling social unrest, and revolts were put down swiftly and violently. Earlier in Paul's ministry, unrest in the Jewish community in Rome had led to the expulsion of all Jews from the city for a time. Remember Acts chapter 18, we talked about that. Paul gave specific instructions about civic duties to help the church avoid harm in potentially volatile circumstances. By describing civil authorities as being ordained of God and God's ministers, Paul acknowledged that all who hold positions of power are accountable to God, and they hold power only to the extent that God allows. So this is not just saying the church, but the civic authorities, that if we try to revolt against them, we're in the wrong. We need to work within the bounds of working with them. In fact, verse 2, he says, whosoever therefore resisteth the power, resisteth the ordinance of God, and they that resist shall receive themselves damnation. So if we resist our leaders, civic leaders and ecclesiastical leaders, we can get ourselves into trouble. They're the ones that God has given the opportunities to have power, to have that opportunity to do things over us, okay? Power in the worldly sense of the term is defined as the ability to make a choice that controls other people's agency. So if I can make a choice that impacts your ability to choose, like I take your agency from you and make a choice for you, that's worldly power. That's what he's talking about here. God's power is a whole different ball of wax. When you think of the word power from a God perspective, it's not that at all. But that is the worldly way of thinking about power. And so sometimes our civic leaders can make choices that are good, and sometimes they're bad. Sometimes ecclesiastical leaders can make choices that are good and choices that are bad. It's not for us to resist them, to say, you're wrong, I'm going to fight against you. I'm going to cause a rebellion against you, okay? Understand, he's going to talk about this. In fact, verse 3, he says, for rulers are not a terror to good works, but to the evil. Wilt thou then not be afraid of the power? Do that which is good, and thou shalt have praise of the same. So again, even if the rulers do make bad choices, that's their choice, okay? Your choice is your response to it. And Paul's saying your response needs to be doing good things. And resisting is not good. Okay, so verse 4, for he is the minister of God to thee for good. But if thou do that which is evil, be afraid, for he beareth not the sword in vain. For he is the minister of God, a revenger to execute wrath upon him that doeth evil. So this is to administer justice, with the idea of the sword, beareth the sword. That's administering justice. So when we fight against other people, they have to deal with the quelling of this, okay? Even if they're wrong, we're not there to resist them. We have to understand that. We're not there to resist the leaders. We need to work within that group, okay? Because it's agency. We need them to exercise their agency. If we try to force them to change, we are trying to gain power to ourselves to make them change the exact same way they had power to make us change. That's fighting evil with evil. It's doing the same thing back to them that they did to you. That's not how God works. It's not the whole idea of resisting somebody is trying to take power to overcome them. That's what it is. So that's using worldly power. That's not it. It's agency that we have to think about, okay? So if we work within what they've said, if we obey them, follow them, and work within them, then their choice is what will God hold them accountable for. That's what God is going to do. Hold them accountable for the choice they have made. This is important. I think in politics, this is a huge issue. We spend way too much time trying to force the other party to go the way we want them to go. That's not what we should do. We should allow them to make their choices and let them lie in the bed they've made. Sometimes they'll make a good choice and sometimes they'll make a bad choice. Let them make the choice and let the consequence follow. You don't need to force it. Politicians do this way too much. Oh, they made this law, so we're going to change it. We're going to manipulate stuff to change this law around. No, guys. Let them fall on their face on their own accord. Stop trying to resist them. Okay, we saw this with Trump. I understand the Democrats hate Trump, especially in 2016, his first election. They did not like him at all. But it doesn't mean they have to find reasons to hate him and actively fight against him. Let him, if he's a bad president, let him fall on his face. That would help the rest of the world go, oh, look, he's not a good president. We're not going to elect him anymore. If you don't let him fall on his face, then you are the ones to blame for what goes on with him, because you're not letting him fail. You're trying to force him to fail instead of letting him do it on his own. This is such an important thing for us to be careful with. Stop forcing people. Stop taking people's agency from them. Let them fall on their own. I mean, honestly, let them make the choice and then they'll go, oh, that didn't work. That will help them to better learn, and you will not be held accountable for what they're doing. If you force them, you are the one that's accountable. The one who's exerting the power is the one that's accountable. So if you resist a leader and you're wrong, you're held accountable for that. Don't resist them. Let them have that wrong so it's clear they're in the wrong, you're in the right. Okay? God will sort all that out. So you want to be careful with that. That's what he's getting at with this, okay? Verse 5, wherefore ye must needs be subject, not only for wrath, but also for conscience sake. So, and Wayment brings this up in his New Testament book. According to Paul's statement, civil authorities administer God's wrath, basically. This is what he's saying here. Now, verse 6, for this cause pay ye tribute also, for they are God's ministers, attending continually upon this very thing. Render therefore to all their dues, tribute to whom tribute is due, custom to whom custom, fear to whom fear, honor to whom honor. Owe no man anything but to love one another, for he that loveth another hath fulfilled the law. So this is the crux of it. If we do our best to do good within the ways that the powers that be are forcing us, we are okay. It's those who use their authority over you, that if they force you to do something wrong, they're the ones that are held accountable for it, not you. So this is a good lesson for leaders, civic and religious. If you do something, if you make a choice that causes other people to not have a choice, if you make others do things the way you want them to do it, and you're wrong, God holds you accountable for that, not them. If the shepherd makes the wrong choice, it's not the sheep's fault. It's the shepherd's fault, and the shepherd will be held accountable for what they did and how it happened for the sheep. This is important. In today's world, we spend so much time worrying about resisting. That's not God's law. Okay, now again, if you find people that are resisting and you're like, hey, you're resisting, you must be evil and bad. No, 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 no. You're missing the bigger point. God wants you to love those people and to do good with them and help them. They have their agency and they should be allowed to choose to resist or not. You have your agency. Make sure you're not condemning them, which is condemning you, even if they are wrong. Just help people. Stop being a problem for people, but help people. Okay. Um, let's see. For verse 9, now he's getting into this idea of the law. For this, thou shalt not commit adultery. Thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not bear false witness, thou shalt not covet. And if there be any other commandment, it is briefly comprehended in this saying, namely, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. So pulling it all together, Paul uses he's pulling all these together. He's using the Ten Commandments and saying, and all the other commandments that need to be put in there as well. So that catch all of it comes down to thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. That's what it boils down to. The two great commandments, love God and love your neighbor. All of them fit in one of those two categories. That's why we need to focus on that. Okay, and what's interesting in verse 9 is the order of the commandments that he uses here. Some scholars have pointed this out. Paul uses the order of these commandments that's found in the Septuagint, the Greek Old Testament, not the Hebrew, the Greek Old Testament. So there's a difference in order sometimes. He's using the Septuagint's order. So we can tell he's still reading Greek Old Testament, basically. So I hope this is helpful to look through what Paul's telling us in this. Now, Joseph Smith, in his translation efforts, made some changes to this as well. He adjusted some of these verses here. So I want to get into this. Verses 6 and 7 primarily. For the Joseph Smith translation, he says, for this cause pay ye your consecrations also unto them, for they are God's ministers, attending continually upon this very thing. But first, render to all their dues according to custom, tribute to whom tribute, custom to whom custom, that your consecrations may be done in fear of him to whom fear belongs, and in honor of him to whom honor belongs. So when Joseph Smith did his translation of that, he is really emphasizing again this idea. If somebody's making you afraid, you offer your oblations to them, it is doubling down that they have a problem and they need to be helped with. If you treat somebody good who's treating you bad, it will reflect on them. It'll reflect on you as good, them as bad. That is what we are asked to do. Not resist, but work with them. Work within the system to make change. And if they choose not to change, then we suffer. We deal with that. But God will recompense that. And it'll bring that obvious divide. Oh my gosh, that person did wrong. You were in the right. That'll be proven out. So you don't need to worry about it. God will handle all that for you, basically. All right, so let's jump forward here. Verse 10, love worketh no ill to his neighbor. Therefore, love is the fulfilling of the law. So if you're not loving your neighbor, maybe you need to work on that. Maybe that's an indication. Verse 11, and that, knowing the time, that now it is high time to awake out of sleep, for now is our salvation nearer than when we believed. So he's saying, guys, you're running out of time. You need to make changes to your life. You need to improve yourself. Work on these things now, not later. Verse 12, the night is far spent, the day is at hand. Let us therefore cast off the works of darkness, and let us put on the armor of light. So this is the idea of taking off old things and putting on better things. We need to change. We can't do things the way we've always done them and expect it to be different. We have to change. Adopting Christ in our life means change. You can't live the world and have Christ in your life. They contradict each other. We need to focus on leaving the world behind and doing what Christ wants us to do. That's super, 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 super important. Don't focus on the cultural stuff. Get away from all that and focus on your relationship with Christ. That's the main thing you need to be worried about. So let's see here. Where did I go? Verse 12. Oh no, I just read that one. Verse 13. Let us walk honestly, as in the day, not in rioting and drunkenness, not in chambering and wantonness, not in strife and envy. So wantonness is sexual impropriety, basically. So let's walk honest. Let's not stop lying to ourselves. Let's stop deceiving ourselves and deceiving others. Let's stop hiding behind worldly pleasures. Let's stop trying to avoid the challenges we have in our life. Let's be honest. Let's show love and kindness to ourselves and love and kindness to others. Let's get rid of this worldliness and focus more on God. Verse 13, let us walk honestly as in the day. Oh, so I just read that one. Verse 14, but put ye on the Lord Jesus Christ, and make not provision for the flesh, but to fulfill the lusts thereof. So again, the New Testament Study Manual commented on this, saying Paul's counsel to make not provision for the flesh reflects the truth that controlling our thoughts is crucial to withstanding temptations. The Greek word translated as provision means forethought. When people succumb to temptation, it is often because they have allowed themselves to dwell on the temptation and think about committing the sin. Now, this follows what Christ taught. He said, not just don't kill somebody, but don't get angry. Because what happens? Anger causes you to want to kill them. So let's deal with the anger. Let's deal with the thought before it becomes an action. Same with the idea of don't covet your neighbor's wife. Don't sleep with your neighbor's wife. Don't even think about it, because the thought leads to the action. Let's stop the thought before it becomes an action. That's what he's getting at here. Let's improve our thinking. Let's improve our attitudes, so that if we do that, the rest of the actions and things will change themselves and go away. You don't have to worry about it, basically. So that's what he's getting at here. Let's get back to thinking properly, showing love and kindness to people, helping people, wanting to be sincere, empathetic, and helping. That will change our behaviors and everything else. So that's what Paul's getting at. So let's stop there because we're at the end, and then we'll jump over to the next chapter as we continue forward.